Welcome. This is the introduction to the session on digital value, data rights, extractivism and Indigenous knowledge, which is part of the virtual conference Extraction, Tracing the Veins, being hosted by Massey University in New Zealand and Wageningen University in the Netherlands. I would like to begin the welcome to this session by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands I'm presenting on from here today in Canberra, the Ngunnawal peoples, and pay my respects to the elders past and present. I would also like to pay my respects to all the First Nations people internationally who are part of or listening to this session. And as we speak of issues that have and continue to have profound effect on Indigenous people, express my intent to work together for a better future. This session is part of a mini forum on data mining being organised by the CoData Centre of Excellence in Data for Society at the University of Arizona. And I would like to thank Mert Fock for bringing us all together for this session. My name is Stephanie von Gavel. I'm a Business Development Manager with the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, CSIRO, based in Canberra, Australia. We have 4 speakers who will be providing some background, reflections and ideas around our central theme of extractivism and Indigenous knowledge. Stephanie Russo-Carroll is from the University of Arizona, and she will be speaking on the significance of Indigenous data sovereignty and Indigenous data governance, looking at the meaning of Indigenous data, describing some of the challenges that Indigenous communities face in securing their data rights and governing their data assets. Next, Maui Hudson from the University of Waikato in New Zealand will be speaking on extracting Indigenous resources, data and equitable benefit sharing, and providing some background on tools such as traditional knowledge labels and biocultural labels that support Indigenous data sovereignty. Neil Davies is from the University of California, Berkeley, and his topic is Fair's Fair, local extraction and global value, and we'll be exploring genomics research data extraction, digital rules and rights, and economics of knowledge, and also providing a tropical islands data twin example and how some open science principles widen the global inequality gap. Finally, Paul Box from CSIRO in Australia will look at extractive to generative environmental assessment data and implications for Indigenous knowledge, describing Australia's National Environmental Assessment data ecosystem and the implications for Indigenous data and knowledge use. I wanted to provide some high-level reflection on some of the narrative and concepts that will be discussed by our speakers. I wanted to suggest some ways of connecting their thinking, but at the same time ask you as the audience to reflect on this and join in on our live panel on 6 or 7 July, depending on where you are in the world, to engage in an active conversation around the ideas being presented by our speakers. I've often personally looked at information, data, digital infrastructures and platforms as part of an information supply chain. This is one way to deconstruct some of the components of that supply chain, from access or the collection, curation, existence, generation and creation of data and information, and the different types of data, information and even knowledge that forms part of that component. And our speakers will give examples of these from Indigenous data, genetic resources, for example. While a lot of that information will be kept locally, often that information is aggregated in databases, information platforms, or even collections of various types. Sometimes that can be through an active decision to share, or even extracted with or without consent. Finally, that information is applied for a particular purpose, whether it's an analysis in science or to support decision making or nation building. The question here is whose decision making or for whose benefit? In using a supply chain framing, it also provides a way to understand how that supply chain operates and how information or data flows through that supply chain. What's the governance, culture, tools, relationships, or social architecture that enables or even hinders that flow of information through that supply chain? It also means you can look at some of the surrounding ecosystem that surrounds that supply chain, whether it be the drivers of the system, the different actors in that system, and even some of the economics of the system. The supply chain concept often comes across as quite linear or a one-way process, a form of extractionism in its own way. Find it, pool it together and do something with it. There's also the assumption that the apply phase has some positive or beneficial outcome, which is not always the case, and speakers will give examples of that. But as the speakers touch on, there are also potentially generative loops where new information or data or derivatives can be generated through that supply chain again. There are also a suite of other narratives that you'll hear through our speaker's presentation, in particular the tensions that exist in this extractive way of looking at data, and in particular Indigenous data, we have these concepts around fairness and fairness of to whom. This, open data, open science concept. You'll hear a lot about sovereignty and control and the implications of that, and where is value being generated and by whom, and what are some of the sort of protection, whether it's through the intellectual property system or contracting or protocols, where we may look at those tensions as well, and who has the resources and capability in this context. And again, context, you'll hear that again through our speakers' talks, is very important. How it operates at that personal level, local or community level, through to some of the implications at that international agenda, whether it's through things like UNDRIP and human rights as well, and the implications of institutional type arrangements and the influence that that has. And you'll hear examples of different types of technologies, infrastructure, database types, collections, and how we might represent or don't represent Indigenous knowledges in those infrastructures as well. And there's some examples of the implications of things like AI, machine learning and digital twins in this area as well, and the importance of provenance, understanding where some of that data might come from. If you're interested in understanding a bit more about the work of our speakers, I've put up here a number of their publications, and please feel free to read these before our live session next week. As I mentioned, we have on the 6th and 7th of July, depending where you are in the world, a live panel discussion where our speakers will give a bit of more reflection on the talks that you'll be listening to, and then be open to questions from you, the audience. We also have an interesting live co-creative workshop on the 9th of July, and this is open to everyone who wants to continue the conversation further and potentially, design a collaborative project to address some of the issues that have been outlined. You'll find more information about that on the conference website. And again, there are also other sessions in this data mining area, and I'd also recommend you listening to those. Again, thank you very much, and I hope you really enjoy the speakers' presentations. Thank you.